Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition. How are you doing today, Heather?
Chilly today. It's cold.
It is cold. It is cold, but you should be pretty well rested since the school board was so short last night. That was unbelievable, but we still listened in for however long it was. We listened to all the public comments, listened to the very quick discussions by the board, and we're here to give you a quick recap of what was covered and what you might have missed that was actually a part of the board meeting last night. So, Heather, you want to give us a quick overview of what went down last night?
Yeah, so we heard a lot of public comments from people and a lot of teachers asking for us to delay going back in person. Those were obviously probably left last week as before we were fully back in person, and now we have first and second graders starting today. Kindergarten and pre-kindergarten started Monday. We also talked about the board voted on their resolutions or their focus for the year. They had three main focuses that they're going to focus on. They're going to focus on literacy, they're going to focus on climate and culture, and then a quality implementation of the CDD.
Yep.
And the board also added a proposal to have a Tyler Johnson Day. They'll be talking about that and making the details about it coming up very soon.
Yep. So there wasn't any slides. There was no deck. So if you're digging through the board agenda like I was all last week and the start of this week, and you're expecting something to be thrown up late, there's nothing there to show. And I think a lot of that was due to the board wanting to give the administration and senior leadership a lot of space to just like get students back in school, get ready, make sure teachers have what they need, make sure school sites are safe. And so I think that led to really there being a short public discussion. We do know that they went into executive session, or they had executive session before the board meeting, and then they went back into executive session after the meeting, which we're not exactly sure what was discussed. It could have had a lot to do with some of the ongoing conversations with the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers. It could have had to do with some of the legal obstacles that have been put in place with the injunctions and how they're handling that. So we're not entirely sure what was discussed in that. But I did want to actually mention just one thing that was probably the longest part of the meeting, which was the superintendent's, outside of public comments, which is the superintendent's comments. The superintendent did talk a little bit about how the first few days of school went for our pre-K and kindergartners, but also hinted at a potential for secondary students and middle school students to be going back in person this year, which has been a big thing that people have been wondering about. And so we wanted to make sure that even though it was just a brief comment, we did want to make sure we highlighted that and let people know as we start to have this conversation around what does this look like moving forward so that people aren't caught off guard. Yeah. What did you catch that, Heather? What did you think?
Yes, I did, and I was able to attend the district's Q&A for parents that they did live on Saturday, which, by the way, that was another thing the superintendent mentioned in his comments about how those live events and social media and some of the things that they've been forced to do or have had to look at differently have actually ended up being things that parents and communities of color have found very helpful and that they'd like to continue to do more of. But at the live Q&A on Saturday, I did hear Rochelle Cox say that same thing. Like, we don't have a date for when we would be talking about middle schoolers and high schoolers going back, but we are making plans. So that's the second time I've heard that message this week.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So since the meeting was short, the recap will be short. So let's do a quick most valuable moment and do better moment. Do you want to start with your most valuable moment, Heather?
Yeah, I mean, my most valuable moment really is around the board priorities. I feel like their priorities really align with kind of the things that maybe we're the weakest at in the district. And so rather than, kind of going everywhere, they're just kind of really focusing in on like what do we need to change about literacy? What's real there? Where are we not connecting dots? I think that, and they wanted to talk about healthy implementation of the CDD, which I think like doing that with fidelity is a priority for our coalition to be watching. And I think that it is something that historically we, need to do better at. and then also talking about climate and culture, right? So the climate and cultures of our schools, particularly toward families and students of color, and really talking about how we're going to use the new language that we're developing, that we're getting feedback on right now, really focusing on how we're going to make that a reality in our schools. So I was like really encouraged to hear those board priorities.
Yeah. I would say my most valuable moment is similar. I would actually just hone in specifically on the board focus area around literacy, curriculum, instruction, and evaluation, and to specifically name those three parts of that board focus area, I think is really important. You know, you hear me consistently say that we don't talk about academics during board meetings. And so I think it'll be important for the board this year to really like hammer in and talk about academics and talk about how are we evaluating what we're doing, how are we examining our instruction, and how are we utilizing and how helpful is our curriculum. So I think that's a really big focus, and I'd say that gets my most valuable moment from yesterday's meeting. What about your do better moment, Heather?
Okay, so I know that right now we have a lot of anxiety and teachers are really nervous. And our teachers in Minneapolis public schools haven't been back inside of a building since last March, right? So um, I know that there's a lot of fear and I validate that. But the other thing is I also know that words matter and words that we leave on a public forum, like before you leave your board message, they say this is now public data and if we can do with it what we would like. And so there is that moment where you can hit erase and start over again. And the very first comment last night for Colin, it was an MPS teacher, and he called students carriers of death. And I even had a mom say to me like I had to turn it off because I don't want my first grader to hear herself called that. And I just like I think that in moments like this when there's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, we need to be more careful with our words and really think about like who we are in the community, who we represent, who might hear us say those things. And so I think my do better moment would be for teachers who are expressing anxiety to think about maybe who's hearing their words.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that was really shocking. I was like listening, but I was kind of doing something at the moment, and then I just stopped and was like, wait, what? How could someone actually say that? And again, I know all of this conversation and pushback and narrative that has been out there about the return to in-person school has been really toxic and has been really, but also has brought up a lot of fears, and that's real and it's valid. And I think like you said, we need to be careful about how we use our words. And I think we also need to maybe look at ourselves and say, like, how are we viewing kids? And what is our priority? And how are we saying, like, in one breath, we hear teachers saying, oh, well, of course we want students back in school. We just need to do it in a safer way. And then at the same time, calling them, carriers of death. Like, that is really gross to me. And I think that's really problematic. So, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I had a really hard time trying to figure out what to do better moment because the meeting was so short again. But I actually did think of one. And so my do better moment is actually the process, I think, for the board focus areas. Um, I don't necessarily disagree with these board focus areas that you mentioned, and I think they're fine. I do think it's weird that it happened on a first, like, this was the first time anyone heard about it publicly. This was a first reading and they voted on it. Like, I just think that there could have been an opportunity to engage the public around what are the topics that you want us to talk about, that you want to hear the senior leadership talk about with the board. I just think there could have been a real opportunity there to really engage the public, to really build, try to build more trust. And that just didn't happen. And I juxtapose it with, Tyler Johnson Day having a first reading, and then there's going to be a second reading and a vote at the end of the month. But then the board focus areas don't need to have two readings. It can just get voted in. And I just don't know what the process is and why one thing needs two readings and one needs another. So I think that'd just be my do better moment is just some consistency in the process so that people can understand what to expect. But then also I think there's also a piece here which is around there was a real opportunity to build trust and build an opportunity for public engagement to hear what are some other things that the board could have listened to on behalf of their constituents, and it just felt like a missed opportunity there. So that would be my do better moment.
Yeah, it feels like maybe we've talked about this. It feels like learning loss would be one a board priority for this year, and yeah, we've also talked about like how can you build good climate and culture if you're not specifically talking about building leaders. So yeah, I can hear that. I think it's good when there's tension between those point of views. Like, yep, we're glad that these are there, and yep, we think there could have been a different process.
Yeah. Well, that's it for us. Check out our longer video. We'll dive into, what else is going on in MPS and all the things around what was discussed yesterday. But thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.